After her sister's death, she signed a 5-year contract marriage with her sister's billionaire husband. That's the moment everything in her life flips upside down. A quiet young woman steps into a mansion filled with grief, secrets, and the ghost of the sister she'd just lost. She thinks she's only honoring a final wish by marrying a man whose heart is shattered. But the deeper she walks into that house, the more the walls whisper the truth. There are things her sister never said, papers she never meant anyone to find, and a secret so painful it could destroy the fragile peace inside that home. Now she's trapped between a man learning how to breathe again and the memory of a sister who may not have been who she seemed. So when the truth finally comes out, will this contract marriage heal 2 broken hearts or tear them apart forever? Tell me in the comments where you're watching from right now, and if this story speaks to you, make sure you hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. The autumn sunlight filtered through the chapel's stained glass windows, casting soft patches of color across the polished wooden pews. Hudson Carter's hands trembled slightly as she adjusted another white lily in the spray of flowers at the front of the small sanctuary. The sweet scent of the blooms mixed with the familiar woody smell of furniture polish, a combination that would forever remind her of this day. She'd been here since dawn, keeping her hands busy to stop her mind from wandering too far into the depths of her grief. The flowers needed arranging, the programs needed straightening, the photos of Willow needed to be positioned just right. Her sister's radiant smile beamed from each frame, capturing the magnetic energy she'd carried through life. "Can I help you with anything?" Pastor John Ellis's gentle voice came from behind her. His kind eyes crinkled with concern as he watched her fuss with the flowers for the 100th time. Hudson managed a small smile. "No, thank you, Pastor. I think everything's ready." She stepped back, surveying her work while smoothing down her black dress. The chapel looked beautiful, intimate, just as Willow would have wanted. As the afternoon light softened, people began arriving in small groups. Hudson greeted each one at the door, accepting their hugs and murmured condolences with quiet grace. These were Willow's closest friends, the ones who had known her real smile from her public one. The foundation staff arrived together, their usual professional demeanor softened by genuine sorrow. The wooden doors creaked open once more, and Graham Whitaker entered. Hudson's breath caught at the sight of her brother-in-law. The usually imposing billionaire looked smaller somehow, his broad shoulders hunched beneath his perfectly tailored suit. His face was drawn, eyes shadowed by days of sleepless nights that matched her own. Their gazes met across the chapel, and for a moment Hudson saw past the wealthy businessman to the raw grief they shared. He gave her a slight nod before taking his seat in the front pew. Pastor Ellis began the service with a prayer, his steady voice filling the quiet sanctuary. "We gather today to remember Willow Carter Whitaker, a beloved sister, wife, and friend." Hudson sat with her hands clasped tightly in her lap, trying to focus on the pastor's words rather than the growing ache in her chest. Memories of Willow flooded her mind, her sister's infectious laugh, the way she'd dance around the kitchen while cooking, how she'd always known exactly what to say when Hudson was feeling down. The service passed in a blur of hymns, readings, and shared memories. Hudson barely registered standing to light the memorial candle, her movements automatic as she carried out the rituals of goodbye. Through it all, she was acutely aware of Graham's presence, his silent grief a mirror of her own. As the final prayer concluded and people began to move toward the reception area, Graham approached her. His usual confident stride was replaced by heavy steps, and Hudson noticed his eyes were rimmed with red. "Hudson," he said softly, reaching into his suit jacket. "Willow, she left this for you." He withdrew a cream-colored envelope, her name written across the front in Willow's distinctive, flowing script. Hudson's fingers trembled as she took it. "Thank you," she whispered, but Graham had already turned away, disappearing through the chapel doors. The last rays of sunset stretched across the floor as Hudson sank into a back pew, alone with her sister's final words. The envelope felt heavy in her hands, weighted with unspoken meaning. Taking a deep breath, she carefully broke the seal. Inside, she found 2 pieces of paper. The first was a handwritten note in Willow's familiar handwriting. "Take care of him, Hudson. He saved me. Now he needs saving too." Hudson's vision blurred with tears as she unfolded the second document. Legal terminology jumped out at her as she scanned the page. Marriage contract, 5-year term, charitable foundation preservation. Her sister's signature graced the bottom of the page, along with blank spaces waiting for her name and Graham's. The chapel had grown dim, shadows deepening in the corners as evening settled in. Hudson stared at the papers in her hands, her mind struggling to process what Willow was asking of her. A marriage contract. To Graham, the man who had loved her sister, who had built an empire of giving with her, who now seemed as lost in his grief as Hudson felt in hers. She carefully folded the papers back into the envelope, her hands shaking slightly. The weight of Willow's request pressed against her heart, mixing with her grief to create something new and uncertain. Outside the chapel windows, the last light of day was fading, taking with it the final moments of a life she had known and understood. Through the growing darkness, Hudson sat motionless in the pew, the envelope clutched in her hands. Her sister's last wish echoed in her mind, a request that would change everything. But how could she possibly decide? The answer felt as elusive as the sunlight that had slipped away, leaving her alone with a choice she never expected to face. The empty chapel held no answers, only the lingering scent of lilies and the weight of a decision that would reshape not only her future, but Graham's as well. Willow had always been the one with the grand plans, the bold choices. Now she had left Hudson with perhaps the boldest request of all, and no way to ask her sister why. The morning sun cast long shadows through the towering glass windows of the Foundation's headquarters as Hudson stepped into the lobby. Her heels clicked against the polished marble floor, each step echoing in the vast space. The security guard at the desk recognized her immediately, probably from all the newspaper photos of Willow, and directed her to the top floor. The elevator ride felt endless. Hudson smoothed her simple black dress, trying to calm her racing heart. The letter from yesterday sat heavy in her purse, its contents still sending waves of disbelief through her. When the doors finally opened, she found herself in a sophisticated reception area where a kind-faced woman looked up from her desk. "Ms. Carter, Mr. Whitaker is expecting you. Right this way, please." Graham's office was exactly what Hudson expected. Spacious but understated, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. What she hadn't expected was how different Graham looked from yesterday. His suit was still impeccable, but dark circles shadowed his eyes, and his usual commanding presence seemed diminished. He stood when she entered, gesturing to a leather chair across from his desk. "Thank you for coming, Hudson," he said, his voice rough with fatigue. "I imagine you have questions." Hudson sat down carefully, placing her purse in her lap. "I do. The letter. The contract. I don't understand why Willow would ask this." Graham ran a hand through his silver-streaked dark hair, a gesture that spoke of exhaustion and worry. "The Foundation's bylaws are complicated. When Willow and I established it, we structured it around family continuity. It was her idea. She wanted to ensure the mission would stay true to our original vision." He pulled out a thick folder and opened it on his desk. "The short version is that without a spouse in place, the Foundation could face serious challenges. The board might push for restructuring, or worse, dissolution. Everything Willow worked for could be at risk. Hudson's mind flashed to all the times Willow had called her, excited about a new program they were launching or a family they'd helped. Her sister had poured her heart and soul into this place. But marriage? Hudson whispered. For 5 years. I would never pressure you. Graham said quickly, his eyes meeting hers. Yes, it was Willow's dying wish, but this is an enormous ask. I understand if you want nothing to do with it. Hudson stood up, needing to move. Could I see the foundation, the actual programs? Graham nodded, rising from his desk. Of course. They spent the next several hours touring the building. In the children's center, Hudson watched kids getting one-on-one tutoring, their faces bright with achievement. The medical assistance department was processing applications for families who couldn't afford critical treatments. In the job training center, people were learning new skills, hope evident in their determined expressions. Everything bore Willow's touch, from the cheerful murals in the daycare to the comfortable meeting rooms where support groups gathered. Hudson could feel her sister's passion in every detail, every program designed to lift people up. She talked about this place all the time. Hudson said softly as they stood in the rooftop garden Willow had designed. She'd call me late at night, so excited about some new idea or success story. Graham leaned against the railing, looking out over the city. She made it what it is. I provided the resources, but Willow, she gave it its heart. The afternoon sun was warming the planters full of herbs and flowers, another of Willow's projects, providing fresh produce for the Foundation's cooking classes. Hudson touched a fragrant basil leaf, remembering how Willow would bring home armfuls of herbs to experiment with new recipes. What would happen? She asked. Really happen if the Foundation had to close? Graham's jaw tightened. Thousands of people would lose services they depend on. The education programs, medical assistance, job training, all of it would end. The staff, over 200 people, would lose their jobs. But more than that. He paused, emotion crossing his face. We'd lose Willow's legacy. Everything she built here would just disappear. Hudson walked slowly around the garden, her mind working through the impossible choice before her. The weight of responsibility pressed against her chest, mixing with grief and uncertainty. But underneath it all was a quiet voice, Willow's voice, reminding her that sometimes the hardest choices were the most important ones. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, Hudson turned to face Graham. I'll do it, she said quietly. I'll honor Willow's request. Graham's expression was a complex mixture of relief and conflict. Are you certain? This isn't a small thing you're agreeing to. I know, Hudson replied. But Willow believed in this place, in what it does. I can't let it fall apart if there's something I can do to prevent that. Graham nodded slowly. We should keep it simple. A civil ceremony next week? Just the necessary witnesses and paperwork? Yes, Hudson agreed, her voice steady despite the surreal nature of the conversation. That would be best. They worked out the basic details as the sun set behind the city skyline, casting long shadows across the rooftop garden. Neither of them mentioned the emotional complexity of what they were agreeing to, the strange dance they would have to perform as near strangers becoming legal spouses. When Hudson finally left the building, the streetlights were coming on, casting pools of yellow light on the sidewalk. She could feel the weight of the day settling over her like a heavy blanket. Behind her, she knew Graham was still in his office, probably feeling the same overwhelming mix of emotions. They had each returned to their separate homes that evening, carrying the knowledge of their impending union, a marriage born of duty and a dying wish, with consequences neither of them could fully predict. The city hummed around them, unaware that in 1 week's time, everything would change. The courthouse loomed before Hudson on that crisp Tuesday morning, its stone facade somehow more imposing than she remembered from her previous visits for jury duty. She smoothed down her navy blue dress, simple but formal enough for the occasion, and tried to steady her trembling hands. Graham waited at the top of the courthouse steps, cutting a sharp figure in his charcoal grey suit. His expression was carefully neutral, but Hudson noticed the slight tension in his shoulders, the way his hands were clasped perhaps a bit too tightly in front of him. "Good morning," he said softly as she approached. "Are you ready?" Hudson managed a small nod. "As ready as I'll ever be, I suppose." They walked through security and navigated the maze of corridors in silence. Their footsteps echoed off the marble floors, joining the distant murmur of voices and closing doors that filled the building. It felt surreal, like a dream where everything moved in slow motion. The judge's chambers were small but dignified, with dark wood paneling and rows of law books lining the walls. 2 court employees stood ready as witnesses, their faces professionally blank. Hudson wondered if they saw many arrangements like this, marriages born of contracts and duty rather than love. The ceremony itself was brief and stripped of any sentiment. The judge's words washed over Hudson in a blur of legal terminology. She focused on keeping her breathing steady, on making sure her voice didn't shake when she said, "I do." When it came time to sign the documents, her eyes lingered on Willow's signature on the contract addendum. Her sister's familiar handwriting made her heart ache. Hudson's hand trembled as she picked up the pen. The metal felt cold between her fingers as she carefully signed her name next to Willow's. The finality of that moment, putting her signature to this life-changing agreement, made her chest tight. Graham's signature followed, his pen moving with the swift confidence of someone used to signing important documents. But Hudson noticed a slight hesitation before he set the pen down, a brief moment where something like uncertainty crossed his face. "Congratulations," the judge said, though his tone suggested he was simply reading from a script. "You are now legally married." There was no kiss, no embrace, just a polite handshake between them as they left the chambers. Hudson twisted the simple gold band on her finger, already feeling like a foreign object. "I thought we might have lunch," Graham suggested as they descended the courthouse steps, "to discuss the logistics of your move." "Yes, that would be helpful." Hudson agreed, grateful for the practical focus. He drove them to a quiet restaurant nearby, the kind of place that catered to business meetings with its private booths and understated decor. Once they were seated and had ordered, Graham pulled out a small notebook. "I've had the East Wing guest suite prepared," he said, his tone businesslike. "It has its own sitting room and bathroom, so you'll have plenty of privacy. There's a separate entrance as well, if you prefer." Hudson nodded, appreciating his thoughtfulness in giving her space. "Thank you. That sounds perfect." "Mrs. Reynolds, the housekeeper, will help you get settled. She's been with the family for years and is very discreet." He paused, considering his next words. "I usually have breakfast at 7 o'clock, but please don't feel obligated to join me. The kitchen staff can serve you whenever you prefer." They spent the next hour working out the details of their new arrangement, everything from house keys to security codes to which areas of the estate were private versus shared spaces. Graham was thorough and practical, treating it more like a business merger than a marriage. As their plates were cleared away, Hudson found herself studying her new husband. His face gave away little, but there was a weariness around his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights. She wondered if he was struggling with this as much as she was. "The movers will arrive at your apartment tomorrow at 10 o'clock, Graham said, checking his notebook one last time. "Unless you need them earlier." "No, 10 is fine," Hudson replied. "I should be mostly packed by then." They parted ways outside the restaurant, each heading back to their separate lives for one last evening. Hudson drove to her apartment, the small but cozy space she'd called home for the past 3 years, and faced the half-packed boxes scattered around her living room. The rest of the afternoon and evening blurred together in a haze of packing tape and bubble wrap. Hudson carefully wrapped photo frames and trinkets, each item carrying its own weight of memories. She found herself lingering over certain pieces. The throw blanket Willow had given her last Christmas, the collection of shells they'd gathered on their last beach vacation together. As night fell, Hudson sat cross-legged on her bed, surrounded by boxes labeled in her neat handwriting. The apartment felt different now, as if it was already letting her go. Through her window, she could see the city lights twinkling against the dark sky. Tomorrow, she would wake up, here for the last time, before moving into a mansion with a man who was now her husband, but still felt like a stranger. Sleep proved elusive as Hudson lay in bed, her mind racing with thoughts of what awaited her. The enormity of the change she'd agreed to pressed in on her, making her chest tight with anxiety. She clutched her pillow, trying to find comfort in its familiar softness, while questions tumbled through her mind. How would she fit into Graham's world? What would it be like living in the home he'd shared with Willow? How would they navigate this unusual arrangement day by day? The night stretched on, marked by the gentle ticking of her bedside clock and the distant sounds of the city. Hudson drifted in and out of uneasy sleep, her dreams filled with empty hallways and echoing footsteps. Around her, the half-packed boxes stood like silent sentinels, waiting for morning to come and carry her into her new life. The morning sun cast long shadows across Hudson's apartment as she stood among the packed boxes, her few possessions neatly labeled and ready for transport. At precisely 9:45 in the morning, her phone buzzed with a text from Graham. "The car is on its way." Minutes later, a sleek black sedan pulled up outside. The driver, professional and courteous, helped load her boxes, while Hudson took one last look around her empty apartment. The space that had been her sanctuary now echoed with emptiness, each footstep a reminder of the life she was leaving behind. The drive to the Whitaker estate took 30 minutes, winding through increasingly affluent neighborhoods until they reached the iron gates that marked the property's entrance. Hudson's heart beat faster as they drove up the tree-lined driveway, the mansion growing larger with each turn. The limestone facade gleamed in the midday sun, its windows reflecting the clear autumn sky. As the car came to a stop, the front door opened to reveal Mrs. Harland, the housekeeper. She was a warm-looking woman in her 50s, wearing a neat navy dress and a gentle smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Welcome home, Mrs. Whitaker," Mrs. Harland said, then quickly corrected herself. "Or would you prefer Miss Carter?" "Hudson is fine," Hudson replied softly, trying not to flinch at hearing Willow's former title applied to her. "Of course, Hudson." Mrs. Harland's smile grew more genuine. "Let me show you to your room while the staff brings in your things." They walked through the grand entrance hall, their footsteps echoing on the marble floor. Hudson tried not to stare at the massive crystal chandelier overhead, or the sweeping staircase that curved up to the second floor. Everything spoke of old money and careful preservation. "The east wing is this way," Mrs. Harland explained, leading her down a long corridor. "Mr. Whitaker thought you might appreciate having your own space." The guest suite was larger than Hudson's entire apartment. Sunlight streamed through tall windows that overlooked the garden, illuminating pale blue walls and elegant cream furnishings. A sitting room led to the bedroom, which featured a king-sized bed and a walk-in closet that could have housed all her possessions 3 times over. "The bathroom is through there," Mrs. Harland indicated a door. and this one leads to your private entrance. Is there anything else you need?" Hudson shook her head, overwhelmed. "No, thank you. This is more than enough." Once alone, Hudson began unpacking, trying to make the impersonal space feel more like home. But every time she stepped into the hallway, she found herself confronted by photographs, dozens of them, documenting Graham and Willow's life together. Willow at charity galas, radiant in designer gowns. Willow in the garden, her hands dirty from planting flowers. Willow and Graham on their wedding day, both looking impossibly young and happy. Around 2 o'clock, Hudson heard Graham's footsteps approaching. He appeared in her doorway, his tie loosened and jacket removed, looking slightly less formal than usual. "I thought you might like to see some of Willow's favorite places," he offered quietly. Hudson nodded, following him through the house. Their first stop was the art studio, a light-filled room on the 3rd floor, with windows on 3 sides. Unfinished canvases leaned against walls, and dried paint tubes lay scattered across tables. Everything was exactly as Willow had left it. She spent most of her mornings here, Graham said, his voice thick with emotion. Said the light was perfect for painting. They moved on to the gardens, where late autumn flowers still bloomed in carefully tended beds. Graham pointed out the rose bushes Willow had planted herself, and the bench where she liked to read on warm afternoons. The private library was their final stop, a cozy room lined with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves. This was her hideaway, Graham explained. When things got overwhelming, she'd come here to decompress. Hudson ran her fingers along the spines of books, recognizing some of Willow's favorites. The room smelled of leather and old paper, with a hint of the lavender perfume Willow always wore. Their tour ended just as the sun began to set. Graham checked his watch. "Dinner will be served at 7 if you'd like to join me." The dining room was formal, with a table that could seat 20, though only 2 places were set. The chef had prepared an elaborate meal, but Hudson found herself merely pushing food around her plate. Across the table, Graham seemed to be doing the same. Their attempts at conversation were stilted and awkward. Every topic felt loaded with potential landmines. Memories of Willow, questions about their new arrangement, the foundation work that had brought them to this point. "The foundation board meeting is next week," Graham mentioned between bites. "You don't need to attend if you're not ready." "No, I should be there," Hudson replied. "It's why we're doing this after all." The words hung heavy in the air between them, a reminder of their unusual circumstances. They finished their meal in silence, the clink of silverware the only sound in the vast room. After dinner, Hudson excused herself, retreating to her new bedroom. She sat on the edge of the perfectly made bed, listening to the unfamiliar creaks and groans of the house settling around her. The room was beautiful, but it felt like a hotel suite, impersonal and temporary, despite knowing it would be her home for the next 5 years. From somewhere in the house, she heard classical music playing faintly. Graham's evening routine, perhaps. The melody drifted through the halls like a ghost, another reminder of how out of place she felt in this world of wealth and careful propriety. Hudson changed into her pajamas and pulled out her well-worn copy of Pride and Prejudice, hoping the familiar words would provide some comfort. But even as she tried to lose herself in the story, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was an intruder in this house, filled with Willow's presence, trying to fill a space that could never truly be hers. The antique clock in her sitting room chimed 10 times, its sound both beautiful and somehow lonely in the quiet of the evening. Hudson placed her book on the nightstand and turned out the light, but sleep felt far away as she lay in the too large bed, surrounded by the whispers of a house that held too many memories of her sister. The morning sun filtered through the tall windows of Graham's home office, As Hudson arrived at 9 o'clock sharp, the room was a perfect blend of old-world charm and modern efficiency, with dark wood paneling and state-of-the-art computer equipment. Graham stood by his desk, already rolling up his sleeves. "I thought we could start with these," he said, gesturing to several boxes of files. Willow had her own unique way of organizing things. Hudson nodded, remembering her sister's creative chaos. She always said organization stifled inspiration. They settled into a rhythm, sorting through years of foundation documents. Hudson found herself drawn into the stories hidden within the paperwork, grant applications that had changed lives, thank you letters from families helped by their programs, photographs of community events where Willow's smile lit up every frame. She really poured her heart into this, Hudson murmured, carefully placing another stack of papers into the completed projects pile. Graham's voice was soft when he replied, "Everything she did with her whole heart." As the morning stretched into afternoon, Hudson worked her way through a filing cabinet near the window. The drawer was filled with folders labeled in Willow's distinctive handwriting, mostly financial reports and outreach planning documents. But something caught her eye, a manila folder tucked behind the others, marked only with WC in her sister's hurried scrawl. Curiosity pulled at her. When Graham stepped out to take a phone call, Hudson carefully extracted the folder. The moment she opened it, her heart stopped. Legal letterhead, terms of separation, divorce papers dated just 3 months before Willow's death, never filed but fully drafted. Hudson's hands trembled as she scanned the documents. Creative differences, irreconcilable expectations, growing emotional distance. The clinical language painted a picture so different from what she'd believed about her sister's marriage. All those glamorous photos in the hallway, all those stories about their perfect partnership. Had it all been a carefully maintained facade? Footsteps in the hallway sent her pulse racing. Hudson quickly tucked the folder back where she'd found it, just as Graham returned to the office. Her fingers felt numb, her mind spinning with questions she couldn't voice. "Hudson." Graham's voice cut through her thoughts. "I was thinking, Samuel's coming over for dinner tonight. Would you join us? He's been asking to meet you properly." Hudson forced her voice to remain steady, though her throat felt tight. "Of course, that would be nice." 7 o'clock, Graham suggested, his expression warm but guarded. "Samuel always brings excellent wine." Throughout the afternoon, Hudson struggled to focus on their work. Every time she looked at Graham, she saw new shadows in his expression. What had driven Willow to prepare those papers? Why hadn't she filed them? The questions churned in her mind, making it hard to breathe. At 7 o'clock sharp, Samuel Price arrived. He was tall and distinguished, with kind eyes that crinkled at the corners when he smiled. His handshake was firm and welcoming as Graham made introductions. "Hudson, I've heard so much about you," Samuel said warmly, both from Willow and more recently from Graham. They settled in the formal dining room, where the chef had prepared an elegant meal. Samuel kept the conversation flowing easily, sharing stories about the Foundation's early days and his long friendship with Graham. "Remember that disaster of a fundraiser in 2018? Samuel chuckled, swirling his wine glass. "When the sprinkler system went off in the middle of your speech?" To Hudson's surprise, Graham laughed. A small sound, but genuine. It was the first time she'd heard him laugh since the funeral. The sound made her chest ache, knowing what she'd discovered earlier that day. "Willow said it was divine intervention," Graham recalled, his eyes distant but smiling. "She claimed my speech was putting everyone to sleep anyway." Samuel's presence seemed to soften something in Graham. He spoke more freely, gestured more naturally. Hudson watched him throughout dinner, trying to reconcile this man with the one Willow had apparently considered leaving. After Samuel left, Hudson retreated to her room. She pulled the folder from where she'd hidden it in her bag and slid it beneath her still unpacked suitcase, tucking it between the hard shell and the carpet. The secret felt like a stone in her chest, heavy and cold. Lying in bed, Hudson stared at the ceiling, listening to the distant sound of Graham playing piano somewhere in the house. The melody was melancholic, drifting through the halls like a ghost. She thought about the photos in the hallway, about Graham's faint laugh at dinner, about Willow's last request for Hudson to save him. What had her sister really meant? What kind of saving did Graham need? The answers felt just out of reach, hidden in the pages of those unsigned divorce papers now concealed beneath her suitcase. Hudson rolled onto her side, pulling the covers tight around her shoulders as if they could shield her from the weight of what she'd discovered. Sleep would be long in coming tonight, with this secret lodged between her ribs like a thorn. The morning sun streamed through the kitchen windows, casting warm patches across the marble countertops as Hudson made her way downstairs. She found Graham already seated at the breakfast nook, reading the newspaper with a half-empty coffee cup beside him. He looked up when she entered, offering a small nod. "Good morning," Hudson said softly, settling into the chair across from him. Mrs. Harland had laid out fresh pastries, fruit, and coffee. "Did you sleep well?" Graham asked, folding his paper away. His voice was quiet but carried genuine concern. "Yes, thank you," Hudson replied, though the weight of her discovery from yesterday still pressed heavily on her mind. She focused instead on pouring herself a cup of coffee, adding cream until it turned the perfect shade of caramel. Over the next several days, they fell into an unexpected rhythm. Breakfast became their daily constant, a quiet time of gentle conversation and shared space before the demands of the day took over. Hudson discovered Graham preferred his coffee black and always read the business section first. He learned she hummed softly while preparing her tea and loved fresh berries with her morning yogurt. The Foundation's upcoming spring gala demanded much of their attention. They spent hours in the home office, reviewing guest lists and debating decoration schemes. Hudson's teaching background proved unexpectedly useful as she suggested ways to showcase the Foundation's educational initiatives. "What if we displayed artwork from the after-school programs?" she suggested one afternoon, watching Graham pace near the windows. "Let the donors see exactly what their money supports." He paused, considering. "That's actually brilliant." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Willow would have loved that idea. The mention of her sister's name no longer brought immediate pain. Instead, it carried a bittersweet warmth, like sunshine through rain clouds. Between work sessions, Hudson found ways to soften the mansion's formal atmosphere. The kitchen filled with the comforting scent of fresh baked bread as she taught Mrs. Harland her grandmother's recipe. The staff began lingering in the kitchen, drawn by both the aroma and Hudson's gentle presence. "My mother always said bread feeds the soul as much as the body," Hudson explained to the housekeeper as they kneaded dough together one afternoon. Mrs. Harland's usual professional reserve melted slightly as she shared stories of her own mother's cooking. Fresh flowers appeared throughout the house, cheerful daisies in the morning room, elegant roses in the dining room, peaceful lilies in the library. Hudson arranged them carefully, remembering how Willow had always loved bringing nature's beauty indoors. Late one night, Hudson woke to muffled sounds from down the hall. Following the noise, she found Graham in his study, head in his hands, clearly shaken from a nightmare. Without hesitation, she got him a glass of water and sat quietly nearby. "Would you like me to pray with you?" she offered softly. Graham looked startled, then vulnerable. After a moment, he nodded. Hudson's gentle voice filled the dark room with words of comfort and peace. When she finished, the tension had eased from his shoulders. Their evening walks became another cherished routine. They would circle the extensive grounds as sunset painted the sky in watercolor hues, sometimes talking, sometimes walking in comfortable silence. Graham began sharing stories from his childhood, growing up in a small apartment above his father's failing hardware store, working multiple jobs to put himself through college, the early days of building his company from nothing. "I remember counting pennies for bread," he admitted one evening as they passed the rose garden. "Sometimes I still can't believe how different things are now." Hudson listened with deep empathy, beginning to understand the man beneath the billionaire facade. She saw his fears more clearly, too. The pressure of maintaining Willow's legacy, the weight of so many people depending on him, the darkness that sometimes clouded his eyes when memories became too sharp. As the week drew to a close, Hudson realized the massive house no longer felt quite so foreign. Her presence had begun to leave gentle marks, fresh flowers, the lingering scent of baked bread, small touches that made the space feel more like a home than a museum to grief. Returning from their walk one evening, they paused at the library door. Graham turned to her, his expression unusually open. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for making this place feel less empty." Heat rushed to Hudson's cheeks, and she found herself at a loss for words. The sincerity in his voice touched something deep in her heart, making it flutter unexpectedly. "Good night, Graham," she managed finally, her voice soft. "Good night, Hudson," he replied, holding her gaze for a moment longer before turning away. As Hudson prepared for bed that night, she couldn't stop thinking about the way he'd looked at her, like he was truly seeing her for the first time. The warmth in his eyes had stirred something she wasn't ready to examine too closely. Instead, she focused on her nightly routine, trying to ignore the way her heart had skipped when he'd said her name. She moved around her room, hanging up her sweater and arranging her things for the next day, all while carefully avoiding looking at the suitcase where Willow's secret still lay hidden. The divorce papers felt like a shadow in the room, a reminder that there was so much about Graham and Willow's relationship she still didn't understand. But tonight, Hudson pushed those thoughts aside. She chose instead to remember the genuine gratitude in Graham's voice, the way the house felt warmer somehow, less haunted by grief. Small steps forward, she told herself. That's all anyone could ask for. The next 2 days brought subtle but meaningful changes to the rhythm of life at the Whitaker estate. The late September sunshine warmed the gardens, where untamed flowers and overgrown herbs stretched towards the sky, a living reminder of Willow's absence. Hudson stood at the kitchen window early Thursday morning, coffee cup warming her hands as she gazed at the neglected garden beds. She remembered how Willow would spend hours there, finding peace among the growing things. The garden had been her sanctuary. It needs attention, doesn't it? Graham's quiet voice startled her from her thoughts. He'd appeared beside her, his own coffee in hand, looking out at the tangled greenery. Hudson nodded. "Would you like help getting it back in order?" Something flickered across Graham's face. Pain, gratitude, or perhaps both. "Yes," he said softly. "I think it's time." They spent the afternoon in the garden, Hudson kneeling in the rich soil while Graham gathered tools and wheelbarrows. The work was therapeutic, pulling weeds, trimming back the chaos, uncovering the structure beneath. Mrs. Harland brought them ice-cold lemonade and watched with approval as they worked side by side. "Willow loved these roses," Graham said suddenly, his hands gentle on a climbing rose that had grown wild. She'd spend hours out here, talking to them like they could understand her. Hudson looked up from where she was clearing dead leaves around a lavender bush. Graham's face held that distant look she was beginning to recognize. the one that meant he was lost in memories. She changed, though. He continued, his voice dropping. Toward the end, she stopped coming out here, stopped doing so many things she loved. His shoulders slumped. I should have seen it coming. Should have done more, been more. Maybe if I'd been different. Hudson set down her garden trowel and moved to his side. "Graham," she said gently, "you can't carry that burden. Sometimes people drift away no matter how much we love them." He met her eyes, his own full of pain. "I failed her, Hudson. I wasn't enough to keep her here." "No," Hudson said firmly, resting her dirt-covered hand on his arm. "You gave her everything you could. Sometimes God's plans are different from what we imagine. That doesn't mean we failed." Graham covered her hand with his own, and they stood in silence among the roses Willow had loved. After a moment, he squeezed her fingers gently before returning to his work, but something had shifted between them. As evening approached, they surveyed their progress with satisfaction. The garden looked loved again, though there was still work to be done. Instead of retreating to their usual separate routines, Graham suggested they cook dinner together. "I'm not much help in the kitchen," he warned as they washed up, "but I can follow directions." Hudson laughed. "Well, that's a start. How about pasta? Simple but satisfying." The kitchen came alive with their activity. Hudson showed Graham how to chop vegetables while she prepared the sauce, her mother's recipe coming naturally to her hands. When Graham accidentally splattered tomato sauce on his crisp white shirt, his look of dismay sent Hudson into a fit of giggles. "It's not funny," he protested, but his lips twitched with suppressed amusement. "It absolutely is," Hudson managed between laughs. "The great Graham Whittaker, defeated by marinara sauce." To her delight, Graham actually chuckled, a warm, rich sound she hadn't heard before. "I'll have you know I've conquered corporate boardrooms. Clearly those are easier than basic cooking skills," she teased, handing him a damp cloth. Their dinner turned out surprisingly well, eaten at the kitchen island rather than the formal dining room. The conversation flowed easily, punctuated by moments of comfortable silence. Hudson found herself studying Graham's face when he wasn't looking, noting how the lines of stress had softened somewhat. After they cleaned up, Graham hesitated in the hallway. "There's something I'd like to show you," he said quietly. He led her down a corridor she hadn't explored before, stopping before a set of double doors. His hand trembled slightly as he turned the handle. This was Willow's favorite room, he explained as they entered. I couldn't come in here since." The music room was beautiful, windows stretching from floor to ceiling, their panes catching the last light of day. A grand piano dominated the space, its polished surface reflecting the golden evening light. Sheet music still sat on the stand, waiting for hands that would never return. Hudson moved slowly toward the piano, drawn by its presence. "May I?" she asked softly. Graham nodded, sinking into a nearby armchair as Hudson settled onto the bench. Her fingers found the keys naturally, and the opening notes of "Amazing Grace" filled the room. The hymn's familiar melody wrapped around them like a comfort blanket, speaking of hope and redemption. When Hudson glanced over, she saw tears tracking silently down Graham's cheeks. She continued playing, letting the music say what words couldn't. As the final notes faded away, Graham wiped his eyes. "Thank you," he whispered hoarsely. "I'd forgotten. Forgotten there could be beauty in memories, not just pain." He stood slowly. "Good night, Hudson." After he left, Hudson remained at the piano, her fingers resting lightly on the keys. The room felt different now, less like a shrine to grief, and more like a place where healing could begin. She thought about Graham's vulnerable moments in the garden, his unexpected laughter in the kitchen, the way he'd let her see his tears. Her heart felt full and uncertain all at once. The Graham she was coming to know was so different from the distant figure she'd imagined him to be. His gentle heart, hidden beneath layers of protection, called to something deep within her own soul. Hudson played a few more quiet notes, trying to sort through her confused emotions. Her feelings for Graham were shifting, transforming into something that both thrilled and frightened her. She wasn't ready to name those feelings yet, but she couldn't deny their presence. The music room held her thoughts as darkness fell outside the tall windows. Eventually she closed the piano lid with careful hands and stood, knowing sleep would be elusive tonight. There was too much to process, too many changing dynamics to consider. But for now, she would hold on to the memory of Graham's smile, his tears, and the way he'd trusted her enough to share both. Hudson stood before her bedroom mirror, smoothing down the dark blue silk of her gown. The dress was simple, but elegant, a choice that felt true to who she was, rather than trying to match Willow's bold style. Her hands trembled slightly as she fastened her mother's pearl necklace, the only jewelry she'd chosen to wear. A soft knock at her door made her turn. "Come in," she called. Mrs. Harland entered, her eyes warming at the sight of Hudson. "You look lovely, dear. Mr. Whitaker is waiting downstairs whenever you're ready." Hudson took a deep breath, gathering her courage. "Thank you, Mrs. Harland. I hope I can do this right." "Just be yourself," the housekeeper advised gently. "That's more than enough." Descending the grand staircase, Hudson saw Graham waiting in the foyer. He wore a perfectly tailored black tuxedo, his normally tousled hair neatly combed. When he looked up and saw her, his expression softened in a way that made her heart skip. "You look beautiful," he said quietly as she reached the bottom step. "Thank you," Hudson replied, accepting his offered arm. "I'm nervous about tonight." Graham squeezed her hand reassuringly. "You'll do wonderfully. Just remember, these people believe in the Foundation's mission. They're here to help us make a difference." The drive to the venue was quiet, both lost in their thoughts. The Foundation's annual gala was its largest fundraising event, and this would be Hudson's first public appearance as Graham's wife. She knew comparisons to Willow were inevitable. The ballroom took her breath away. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over elegant table settings, while floor-to-ceiling windows revealed the twinkling city beyond. Flowers arranged in Willow's favorite colors adorned every surface. As guests began arriving, Hudson stood beside Graham, greeting each one with genuine warmth. She was surprised to find how naturally the conversations flowed. Where Willow had dazzled with her magnetic personality, Hudson connected through quiet authenticity and careful listening. "Tell me more about your work with children's literacy," she encouraged one donor, her eyes bright with interest. "That sounds like exactly the kind of program we'd love to expand." Throughout the evening, Hudson moved among the guests with growing confidence. She shared stories about the Foundation's impact, listened to suggestions, and showed genuine appreciation for every contribution. Graham watched from across the room as she knelt to speak with the donor's young daughter, making the child giggle with delight. "Your new wife is quite different from Willow," Samuel, the Foundation's COO, commented to Graham, "but there's something special about her way with people." Graham nodded, his eyes following Hudson as she gracefully navigated another conversation. She has a gift for making everyone feel heard and valued. As the night progressed, Hudson found herself actually enjoying the event. The Foundation's mission felt more personal now that she'd seen its work up close. When she spoke about their programs, it came from a place of genuine passion. "We're hoping to open 3 new community centers next year," she explained to a group of interested donors. "Every child deserves a safe place to learn and grow." Her sincerity struck a chord. By the end of the evening, several major donors had committed to increasing their support. Even more importantly, Husban felt she'd begun to find her own place within the Foundation's world. As the last guests departed, Husban's feet ached from hours in heels, but her heart felt full. She had worried about living up to Willow's legacy, but instead found her own way to contribute. "Would you like to sit for a while?" Graham asked as they arrived home, gesturing towards the library. "I'm not quite ready for the evening to end." Husban nodded, following him into the cozy room. A fire crackled in the hearth, casting dancing shadows on the walls. They settled into the comfortable chairs they'd come to think of as their own over the past weeks. Graham loosened his bow tie and studied Husban's face in the firelight. "You were amazing tonight," he said softly. "The way you connected with everyone, how genuinely you care about the Foundation's work." Husban smiled, touched by his words. "It's become important to me. Not just because of Willow's wishes, but because I believe in what we're doing." Graham reached over and gently took her hand. His touch sent warmth spreading through her fingers. "Husban," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I need to tell you something. These past weeks, your presence here has brought peace back into my life. Peace I thought I'd lost forever." Husban's heart thundered in her chest as she met his gaze. "Graham, She paused, gathering courage. "I feel something changing too. Between us. Something I didn't expect." His thumb traced gentle circles on her palm. "I know we came together because of Willow's request, but it's become more than that, hasn't it?" "Yes," Husban whispered, barely trusting her voice. "I feel it too." They sat in comfortable silence, hands still linked, watching the fire's glow. Neither felt the need to define or label what was growing between them. For now, it was enough to acknowledge its presence. The grandfather clock in the hall chimed 2:00 before they reluctantly parted for the night. As Husban climbed the stairs to her room, she felt lighter somehow, as if sharing their feelings had lifted a weight she hadn't known she carried. That night, she carefully hung up her gown and placed her mother's pearls in their velvet box. The evening had brought more than just success for the Foundation. It had brought clarity. Something was definitely shifting between her and Graham, something real and unexpected and full of possibility. The morning sun streamed through the kitchen windows as Husban hummed softly, whisking eggs for breakfast. The familiar scent of coffee filled the air, while bacon sizzled in the pan. These quiet morning routines had become a comfort over the past weeks, bringing warmth to the once cold mansion. Graham sat at the kitchen island, his reading glasses perched on his nose as he reviewed Foundation documents. He glanced up occasionally, a small smile touching his lips at Husban's gentle presence. "The quarterly reports look promising," he noted, accepting a fresh cup of coffee from her. "Your ideas for the youth mentorship program are already showing results." Husban felt a flutter of pride as she plated their breakfast. "The children just needed someone to believe in them," she said, sliding his plate in front of him. "Sometimes that's all it takes to make a difference." The peaceful morning stretched into early afternoon. Husban had just finished arranging fresh flowers in the entryway when the doorbell rang, its sharp chime shattering the tranquil atmosphere. When Husban opened the door, she found herself face to face with Lydia Morgan. Willow's former friend stood on the doorstep in an expensive designer outfit, her perfectly made-up face wearing an expression of barely concealed disdain. "Well?" Lydia said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "If it isn't the replacement sister, aren't you going to invite me in?" Husban's throat tightened, but she forced herself to step aside. "Please, come in, Lydia. It's nice to see you." Lydia's heels clicked against the marble floor as she entered, her critical gaze sweeping over every detail of the foyer. "How quickly you've made yourself at home," she observed, eyeing the fresh flowers. Willow always preferred orchids, you know. These common daisies are so quaint. Before Hudson could respond, Graham emerged from his office. "Lydia," he said, his tone carefully neutral. "This is unexpected." "Graham, darling." Lydia air-kissed his cheeks. "I've been meaning to stop by. To check on you, of course. Shall we have tea?" Minutes later, they sat in the formal living room, an elegant tea service between them. Hudson poured with slightly trembling hands, aware of Lydia's sharp eyes following her every movement. It must be quite an adjustment. Lydia mused, stirring her tea. Living in your sister's house, wearing her ring, sleeping down the hall from her husband. Some might call it unseemly, moving in so quickly after her passing. Graham's jaw tightened. "Hudson is here at Willow's request, Lydia, as you well know." "Oh yes, dear Willow's final wish." Lydia's laugh held no warmth. She always did have a flair for the dramatic, didn't she? Even at the end. Hudson's hands clenched in her lap. "Willow was my sister. I loved her very much." "Did you?" Lydia's eyes glittered dangerously. "I was there during her final months, you know, when she needed someone to confide in, when she was struggling with certain decisions." The pointed look she gave Hudson made it clear. Lydia knew about the divorce papers. Graham excused himself briefly to take an important foundation call, leaving the two women alone. As soon as he was out of earshot, Lydia's pretense of civility dropped entirely. "Let's be clear," she hissed, leaning forward. "You may have fooled Graham with your sweet, caring act, but I see right through you, stepping into your sister's shoes before she's even cold in her grave. It's disgusting." Hudson felt the color drain from her face. "That's not what this is." She protested weakly. "No?" Lydia's smile was cruel. "I saw how you looked at him tonight at dinner. How long have you been waiting for this chance, Hudson? To finally stop being the plain, forgettable sister and take something that belonged to Willow?" "Please stop," Hudson whispered, her voice breaking. "You don't belong here." Lydia continued, mercilessly. "You're not Willow. You'll never be half the woman she was. And sooner or later, Graham will realize that too." When Graham returned, Hudson excused herself quickly, retreating to her room. She sat on the edge of her bed, trying to steady her breathing as Lydia's words echoed in her mind. The cruel accusations had struck deep, feeding into her own fears and insecurities. A soft knock at her door made her quickly wipe her eyes. Graham stood there, concern etched on his features. "Hudson, are you all right? You look pale." She managed a weak smile, unable to meet his gaze. "I'm fine," she lied. "Just tired. It's been a long day." Graham hesitated, clearly wanting to say more, but Hudson turned away, unable to bear his kindness in that moment. She couldn't tell him about Lydia's cruelty, not when her words had awakened such painful doubts. "Good night, Graham," she said softly, still not looking at him. "Good night, Hudson," he replied, his voice gentle with worry. The door closed quietly behind him, leaving Hudson alone with her troubled thoughts and the lingering echo of Lydia's devastating words. The mansion felt colder somehow, as if Lydia's visit had stripped away the warmth Hudson had worked so hard to create. She lay awake long into the night, wondering if perhaps Lydia was right. Maybe she didn't belong here after all. The morning sun cast long shadows across the breakfast table, where an uninvited Lydia Morgan sat stirring her coffee with deliberate slowness. Hudson tried to focus on buttering her toast, but she could feel Lydia's calculating gaze following her every move. "I thought I'd stay a while longer," Lydia announced, her tone dripping with false sweetness. "To catch up properly with Graham. We have so much to discuss about dear Willow's final months." Graham cleared his throat uncomfortably. "I have meetings this morning, Lydia." "Oh, but surely you can spare some time for an old friend." Lydia's smile didn't reach her eyes. After all, I knew Willow so well, better than some might think. Hudson's hands trembled slightly as she set down her butter knife. The implied threat in Lydia's words was clear. After breakfast, Graham retreated to his study for a conference call, leaving Hudson to deal with their unwelcome guest. She busied herself tidying the kitchen, trying to ignore the way Lydia prowled through the house like a predator seeking weakness. "I think I'll freshen up," Lydia announced eventually. "Which guest room should I use?" "The blue room at the end of the hall," Hudson replied quietly, knowing she couldn't refuse without causing a scene. As Lydia's footsteps faded upstairs, Hudson felt a sudden chill of dread. Her suitcase was still partially unpacked in her room, and the divorce papers. Before she could move, Lydia's triumphant voice rang out from above. "Oh, what have we here?" Hudson's heart stopped. She raced up the stairs, but it was too late. Lydia stood in the doorway of Hudson's room, holding the manila folder with an expression of malicious glee. My, Lydia purred. "What interesting reading material you've been keeping from Graham." "Lydia, please," Hudson begged. "It's not what you think." "Graham," Lydia called out, already heading toward his study. "There's something you need to see." Hudson followed desperately, her legs feeling like lead. Graham looked up from his desk as they entered, his expression shifting from annoyance to concern at their faces. "What's going on?" Lydia held out the folder with theatrical flair. "Look what I found hidden in Hudson's room. It seems your dear new wife has been keeping secrets." Graham took the folder, his face growing pale as he recognized Willow's handwriting. As he read through the divorce papers, his hands began to shake. "When did you find these?" he asked Hudson, his voice dangerously quiet. "A few days ago," Hudson whispered. "In Willow's desk drawer. And you didn't tell me?" Graham's voice cracked with hurt and betrayal. "You just hid them away?" "I was trying to protect you," Hudson pleaded. "You were already dealing with so much grief." "Protect me?" Graham's laugh was bitter. "By deceiving me, by manipulating my vulnerability while I trusted you." Lydia watched with satisfaction from the corner, her arms crossed. "Just as I suspected, using her own sister's death to secure her place here." "No!" Hudson cried. "That's not true. I would never— I thought you were different." Graham cut in, his voice thick with emotion. "I thought you were honest. But you're just like everyone else, aren't you? Using me for your own agenda?" "Graham, please." Hudson's voice broke. "Let me explain. I think you should leave," he said quietly, turning away from her. I can't look at you right now." Hudson stood frozen, tears streaming down her face. Then, moving like a sleepwalker, she returned to her room and began packing her belongings with trembling hands. Outside, dark clouds gathered as she carried her suitcase downstairs. Rain began to fall as she stepped onto the driveway, but she barely noticed. Her chest felt hollow, each breath painful. "I'll have your things sent to you," Graham said from the doorway, his voice distant and cold. Hudson couldn't bring herself to look back at him. She walked through the strengthening rain to her car, each step feeling like it might shatter her completely. The drive back to her apartment passed in a blur of tears and rain-slicked streets. When she finally stumbled through her own door, the familiar sight of her small living room only emphasized how much she'd lost. She collapsed onto her couch, finally allowing the sobs she'd been holding back to overtake her. The sound of rain against her windows provided a steady rhythm to her grief as darkness fell, leaving her alone with the pieces of her broken heart. Mrs. Chen from next door knocked once, concerned by the sounds of crying, but Hudson couldn't bring herself to answer. She lay there as evening deepened into night, her tears eventually running dry, but the ache in her chest only growing stronger. On her coffee table, a framed photo of herself and Willow at the foundation's opening caught her eye. "I'm sorry," she whispered to her sister's smiling face. "I tried. I really tried." The rain continued to pour outside, matching Hudson's desolation as she curled up in the darkness, feeling more alone than she ever had before. Sunlight crept through Hudson's apartment window, casting pale squares on her worn carpet. She hadn't moved from the couch all night, her body stiff and her eyes swollen from crying. The familiar sounds of the city waking up drifted through her thin walls. Car horns, voices on the sidewalk, the rattle of the morning bus. But they felt distant and unreal. With effort, Hudson pushed herself up and shuffled to her tiny kitchen. Her hands shook as she measured coffee grounds into the filter, spilling some onto the counter. The familiar routine felt strange now, like she was moving through someone else's life. While the coffee brewed, she caught her reflection in the window. Puffy eyes, tangled hair, yesterday's clothes wrinkled from sleep. She barely recognized herself. The coffee maker sputtered its last drops as Hudson sank into one of her mismatched kitchen chairs. Steam rose from her favorite blue mug, the one Willow had given her years ago. The sight of it made her chest tighten. "Where did I go wrong?" she whispered to the empty room. Every moment with Graham played through her mind like a movie she couldn't stop. Their awkward first days, the gentle way he'd shown her Willow's garden, their shared laughter in the kitchen, the warmth in his eyes when she played the piano. Each memory felt tainted now, poisoned by her decision to hide those papers. Hudson wrapped her hands around the warm mug, trying to draw comfort from its heat. "I should have told him right away," she said aloud, "the moment I found them." Across town at the Whitaker estate, Graham sat rigid behind his desk, staring unseeing at the foundation report spread before him. He hadn't slept. The divorce papers lay in the center of his desk like a wound, Willow's elegant signature stark against the white paper. When Mrs. Harland knocked softly with his morning coffee, he didn't respond. She left the cup outside his door with a quiet sigh. It was the third time he'd refused to acknowledge anyone since Hudson's departure. Inside his study, Graham pressed his fingers against his temples. The betrayal felt like a physical ache in his chest. First Willow, planning to leave him without a word. And now Hudson, keeping such a devastating secret while pretending to care. "Mr. Whitaker," Mrs. Harland called through the door around noon. "You need to eat something." "Leave me alone," he managed, his voice rough from disuse. Mrs. Harland stood outside his door for a long moment. Then, instead of returning to the kitchen, she grabbed her car keys and coat. Someone needed to fix this mess, and it clearly wouldn't be either of them. The drive to Hudson's apartment took 20 minutes. Mrs. Harland had only been there once before, when she'd helped Hudson pack for the move to the estate. The building looked even shabbier in the harsh afternoon light. Hudson's eyes widened with surprise when she opened the door. "Mrs. Harland?" "Oh, child," Mrs. Harland said softly, taking in Hudson's tear-stained face. "Let me in. We need to talk." Hudson stepped back wordlessly, gesturing to her small living room. Mrs. Harland settled onto the worn couch, patting the spot beside her. "I know about the papers," she said gently, "and I think it's time you knew the whole truth about your sister and Graham." Hudson sank down beside her, twisting her hands in her lap. "What do you mean?" Mrs. Harland's eyes were kind but serious. Willow never loved Graham the way a wife should love her husband. She was grateful to him. He saved her life when she was at her lowest point. But gratitude isn't the same as romantic love. Hudson's breath caught. "What?" "Graham found her that night she tried to—" Mrs. Harland paused, choosing her words carefully. when she was in that dark place. He got her help, supported her recovery, gave her purpose through the foundation. Willow felt she owed him everything. She agreed to marry him out of that gratitude, thinking she could learn to love him properly with time. Tears slid down Hudson's cheeks. She never told me. She was ashamed. Mrs. Harland explained. She knew how much Graham loved her, and she felt trapped by her own inability to return that depth of feeling. Those divorce papers, they weren't about escaping Graham. They were about freeing him to find real love. Hudson buried her face in her hands. But why did she want me to marry him? Mrs. Harland smiled softly. Because she saw in you everything she wished she could be. Your steady faith, your genuine compassion, your ability to love deeply and honestly. She knew you could heal Graham's heart in a way she never could. But I failed, Hudson whispered. I kept those papers hidden and ruined everything. You were trying to protect him, Mrs. Harland said firmly. Just like Willow tried to protect him by staying. But sometimes love means telling hard truths, even when they hurt. They sat in silence for a moment, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the floor. Finally, Mrs. Harland stood. Don't give up, she said, squeezing Hudson's shoulder. And please forgive yourself. You have such a beautiful heart, Hudson. Don't let guilt destroy it. After Mrs. Harland left, Hudson moved through her apartment in a daze, processing everything she'd learned. As night fell, she found herself sinking to her knees beside her bed, just as she had done every night since childhood. Lord, she whispered, her voice trembling, I need your wisdom, your clarity, your strength. I don't know what to do with all these truths, but I know you do. Please guide me. Please help me understand. The city lights twinkled outside her window as she remained there, pouring out her heart in prayer, seeking peace in the midst of her confusion. For the first time since leaving the estate, she felt a tiny spark of hope flutter in her chest. Maybe understanding the whole truth was the first step toward healing, not just for herself, but for Graham too. Graham stood in his darkened bedroom as another sleepless night faded into dawn. His reflection in the mirror looked haunted, dark circles under his eyes, stubble coating his jaw, shirt wrinkled from tossing and turning. He hadn't slept properly since Hudson left. The morning light crept through the curtains, casting long shadows across Willow's untouched wardrobe. He'd avoided looking through her things since her death, but now something pulled him toward those wooden doors. His hands trembled slightly as he opened them. Her clothes still hung there, organized by color just as she'd left them. The familiar scent of her perfume drifted out, making his chest ache. Graham ran his fingers along the soft fabrics, remembering how vibrant she'd looked in each piece. But had that vibrancy been real? Or just another mask she'd worn? At the back of the wardrobe, behind a stack of cashmere sweaters, his hand struck something solid. Graham pulled out a stack of leather-bound journals, their pages stuffed with loose papers and photographs. His heart thundered as he carried them to the window seat, settling into the morning light. The most recent journal lay on top, its pages dog-eared and well-worn. Graham opened it carefully, recognizing Willow's flowing handwriting. March 15th. Another night, lying awake beside him, pretending to sleep. Graham deserves so much more than what I can give. He saved my life, gave me purpose, loves me completely, and I can't return even half of what he offers. The guilt is eating me alive. Graham's hands shook as he turned to another entry. April 2nd. Watched Hudson with the children at the foundation today. She has such natural warmth, such genuine compassion. Everything about her is real. No masks, no pretense. She reminds me of Graham that way. Sometimes I think they would have been perfect for each other if I hadn't gotten in the way. Page after page revealed Willow's private torment. Her gratitude for Graham's rescue had twisted into an obligation she couldn't bear. She wrote about feeling trapped, not by him, but by her own inability to love him the way he deserved. May 20th. Husban visited today. The way she listens, really listens, to people amazes me. She has the kindness I've always pretended to have. When I see her with Graham, how naturally they interact, I feel even more like an imposter. He needs someone who can love him honestly, openly, someone like her. Graham had to pause, his vision blurring with tears. He remembered that day, how Husban had brought fresh flowers and homemade cookies, how she'd sat with him discussing the foundation's future while Willow had retreated to her studio. He'd thought Willow was just having one of her quiet days. He hadn't known she was watching, planning, hoping. June 10th. Started the divorce papers today. Not because I don't care about Graham, God knows I do, but because he deserves a chance at real love. Husban will know how to help him heal when I'm gone. She has the strength I never found, the faith I only pretended to have. The entries grew shorter and more scattered as Willow's illness progressed, but one theme remained constant: her desire for Husban to help Graham find happiness again. July 1st. Husban came to visit me in the hospital today. She doesn't know it yet, but I'm leaving her my most important task, saving Graham the way he once saved me. She's the only one who can help him learn to trust love again. The last entry, dated just days before her death, was barely legible. My dearest Husban, you've always been the better sister, the kinder heart. Please help him remember how to smile. Show him that real love isn't about obligation or guilt. You both deserve that chance. Graham set the journal aside, his chest tight with emotion. The morning had stretched into afternoon while he read, and now golden sunlight filled the room. Everything looked different in its glow, including his memories of Husban's actions. She hadn't hidden those divorce papers out of manipulation or deceit. She'd been trying to protect him from more pain, just as Willow had protected him from her own struggles. Both sisters, in their own ways, had put his healing before their own needs. And how had he repaid that care? By lashing out, by assuming the worst, by driving away the very person Willow had trusted to help him find peace. Graham reached for his phone, dialing Samuel's number with shaking fingers. His friend answered on the second ring. "Graham, are you all right?" "No," Graham admitted, his voice rough. "I need to take some time away from work. There's something important I need to fix." Samuel's response was immediate and understanding. "Take whatever time you need. The company won't fall apart without you for a few days." "Thank you." Graham paused, gathering his courage. "I was wrong about Husban, Samuel. So wrong. Willow knew exactly what she was doing when she brought us together." "I could have told you that," Samuel said gently. "That young woman has more genuine compassion in her little finger than most people have in their whole bodies. What are you going to do about it?" Graham looked out at the setting sun, its warm light reminding him of Husban's gentle presence. "I'm going to make things right, somehow." After ending the call, Graham sat surrounded by Willow's journals, watching darkness settle over the estate. The house felt emptier than ever without Husban's warmth, but now he understood why. Willow had known all along that Husban's steady faith and honest heart were exactly what this cold place needed. What he needed. He had to find a way to fix what his anger and mistrust had broken. He owed it to Willow's memory, to Husban's kindness, and to his own heart's quiet whisper of hope. Grey clouds hung heavy over the city as Husban sat at her small kitchen table, a cup of cooling coffee beside her and blank paper before her. The gentle patter of rain against her window seemed to match the rhythm of her racing heart as she picked up her pen for the 5th time that morning. "Dear Graham," she wrote, then paused, searching for the right words. The paper already held several false starts, each crumpled and discarded. How could she explain something she was still trying to understand herself? She took a deep breath and began again. "I owe you an apology that feels too big for words. Finding those divorce papers shocked me, and in my misguided attempt to protect you from more pain, I ended up causing exactly that. I should have trusted you with the truth immediately. You deserved that honesty. Please know that I never meant to manipulate or deceive you. The time we spent together at the estate showed me a side of you that Willow never fully described. Your kindness, your quiet strength, the way you care so deeply for others even when you try to hide it. I couldn't bear the thought of adding to your grief. These past weeks have taught me so much about faith, forgiveness, and—" Hudson's pen hesitated above the paper. She wanted to write about how her feelings had changed, how seeing him through new eyes had awakened something she'd never expected. But the words wouldn't come. Meanwhile, across town, Graham gripped his steering wheel as he navigated through the increasingly heavy rain. The windshield wipers fought a losing battle against the downpour, matching the frantic pace of his thoughts. He'd rehearsed what to say at least 20 times since leaving the estate, but nothing felt right. How could he explain that reading Willow's journals had shown him not just the truth about their marriage, but about his own heart? That Hudson's genuine warmth had begun healing wounds he hadn't even acknowledged? A car honked as he barely made it through a yellow light, startling him from his thoughts. The rain was getting worse, reducing visibility to mere feet ahead. Any sensible person would turn back and wait for better weather. But Graham pressed on, knowing that every minute he delayed risked losing his chance to make things right. He practiced again under his breath. "Hudson, I was wrong. I should have trusted you. I should have—" He shook his head, frustrated. Simple apologies felt inadequate after the way he'd treated her. Back in her apartment, Hudson set down her pen and walked to the window. The storm had turned the morning nearly as dark as twilight. She pressed her forehead against the cool glass, watching raindrops race down the pane. The letter sat unfinished on her table, much like the conversation she and Graham never got to have. Mrs. Harlan's words from yesterday echoed in her mind. Willow stayed with Graham out of gratitude, but you see him for who he really is. She did see him, his struggles, his pain, but also his capacity for joy and love. She'd witnessed it in small moments, his gentle smile when she played piano, his quiet strength during the gala, the way his eyes softened when she prayed with him. A sudden, urgent knocking jolted Hudson from her thoughts. The sound was almost desperate, barely audible over the storm. She hesitated, not expecting visitors on such a dreary morning. The knocking came again, more insistent. Hudson moved toward her door, heart pounding. Through the peephole, she saw a familiar figure, Graham, standing in her hallway, completely drenched from the rain. Water dripped from his usually impeccable suit, his hair plastered to his forehead. Her hands trembled as she undid the chain and opened the door. Graham stood there, breathing hard as if he'd run up the stairs. His eyes met hers with an intensity that made her catch her breath. He looked simultaneously lost and determined, vulnerable and strong. "Hudson," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I need to—" He stopped, seeming to struggle for words. Hudson noticed he was shivering slightly, his clothes soaked through from the storm. "Come in," she said softly, stepping aside. "You're freezing." Graham entered her small apartment, looking out of place among her modest furnishings, yet somehow exactly where he belonged. Water pooled beneath his expensive shoes on her worn welcome mat. "I'll get you a towel," Hudson said, turning toward her bathroom, desperate for a moment to collect herself. "Wait," Graham called, catching her wrist gently. His touch was cool from the rain, but sent warmth spreading through her arm. "Please, I need to say this first." Hudson turned back to face him, her heart thundering in her chest. Rain continued to drum against her windows, creating a cocoon of sound around them as they stood in her narrow entryway, the air thick with unspoken words. "I found Willow's journals," Graham said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I know why she wanted you to be there after she was gone. She saw something in you that I was too blind to recognize at first, something real and precious and true." Hudson felt tears welling in her eyes, but didn't dare move to wipe them away. "The divorce papers," he continued. "You were protecting me, weren't you? Just like you've been trying to protect me since the day you moved into the estate. And I repaid your kindness with accusations and anger." "Graham, you don't have to—" "Yes, I do," he interrupted gently. "I need to say this. You brought light back into that house, Hudson, into my life. You showed me what real faith looks like, not just in God, but in people, in possibility, in love." The last word hung between them, heavy with meaning. Hudson's breath caught in her throat as Graham took a step closer, his eyes never leaving hers. "I was wrong," he said. "So terribly wrong. Can you forgive me?" Hudson looked up at him, seeing past the successful businessman to the vulnerable soul beneath. The boy who grew up with nothing, the man who'd lost so much, the heart that was finally learning to trust again. The rain continued its steady rhythm against her windows, but in that moment the whole world seemed to hold its breath, waiting for her response. Hudson felt frozen in place as Graham's rain-soaked form filled her doorway. Water dripped steadily from his clothes onto her welcome mat, creating a small puddle at his feet. The usual polished businessman was completely disheveled, his expensive suit clinging to him, his dark hair plastered to his forehead. But it was his eyes that held her attention. They blazed with an intensity she'd never seen before. "Hudson," he began again, his voice rough with emotion. "When you left, everything went dark again. The house felt empty, hollow, just like after Willow died. But this time was different. This time I knew exactly who I was missing." He ran a trembling hand through his wet hair, sending droplets scattering. "I found Willow's journals yesterday. She'd hidden them in the back of her wardrobe. I spent all night reading them, trying to understand." Hudson's heart squeezed painfully in her chest. "Graham, you don't have to— Please," he interrupted gently. "Let me finish. I need you to hear this." She nodded silently, wrapping her arms around herself, as if to hold in all the feelings threatening to spill over. Willow was struggling for a long time. Graham continued. She wrote about feeling trapped by expectations, by the image she thought she had to maintain. She stayed with me out of gratitude, because I helped her when she was at her lowest. But we weren't. We weren't what I pretended we were. His voice cracked slightly. She wrote about you, Hudson, about how you possessed the kind of genuine compassion she wished she could feel, how you saw people, really saw them, and loved them anyway. She wasn't wrong. Graham took a step closer, water still dripping from his clothes. When you came to the estate, you didn't try to replace Willow or pretend nothing had changed. You just brought light. You baked bread for the staff. You filled vases with fresh flowers. You sat with me through nightmares and prayed when I couldn't find the words. He reached for her hands, his touch cool and damp from the rain. Hudson's fingers trembled as they met his. "I've been such a fool," he whispered. "When Lydia showed me those divorce papers, I let my pain and fear blind me. Instead of seeing your protection for what it was, an act of love, I accused you of manipulation. Can you ever forgive me?" Tears spilled down Hudson's cheeks as she looked up at him. "I should have told you about the papers," she said softly. "I was just so afraid of causing you more pain. You were finally starting to smile again, to laugh. I couldn't bear to be the one to reopen those wounds." Graham's hands tightened around hers. "You've never caused me pain, Hudson. You've only ever helped heal it." He took a shaky breath. "I need you to know something. What I feel for you, it's not grief or loneliness speaking. It's not obligation or guilt. I've fallen in love with you." Hudson's breath caught in her throat as he continued. "I love your gentle spirit and your quiet strength. I love how you see beauty in simple things and find hope in dark places. I love that you make our massive house feel like a home just by being in it. I love—" His words were cut off as Hudson stepped forward and wrapped her arms around him, pressing her face into his wet shirt. Graham's arms immediately encircled her, holding her close as if he never wanted to let go. They stood there in her doorway, crying together as the rain pounded against the windows, washing away months of misunderstanding and pain. "I love you too," Hudson whispered against his chest. "I've been fighting it, feeling guilty for having these feelings when I was only supposed to be fulfilling Willow's request. But I can't help it. I love you, Graham." He pulled back just enough to look into her eyes, reaching up to brush tears from her cheek with his thumb. "Then come home," he said softly. "Not because of a contract or a promise to Willow, but because we choose each other. Because we want to build something real together." Hudson nodded, fresh tears spilling down her face. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes." Graham drew her close again, pressing a gentle kiss to her forehead. They stood holding each other as the storm raged outside, but inside Hudson's small apartment, peace settled over them like a warm blanket. Finally, Hudson stepped back with a watery laugh. "You're soaked through. Let me get you a towel and make some tea. We have so much to talk about." They spent the rest of the evening on Hudson's worn couch, hands clasped together as they talked through everything. Willow's struggles, the Foundation's future, their own fears and hopes. Graham shared passages from Willow's journals that showed how much she had wanted them both to find happiness. Hudson explained her initial reluctance to acknowledge her feelings, afraid they somehow betrayed her sister's memory. Willow knew exactly what she was doing. Graham said softly, thumb tracing circles on Hudson's palm. "She knew you would help me heal, but I don't think even she could have predicted we'd fall in love." Hudson squeezed his hand. "Do you think she would have been happy about it?" After reading her journals, "Yes," Graham answered without hesitation. "She wanted us both to find genuine love. She knew what we had wasn't real romance. It was built on gratitude and obligation. But what you and I have found together—" He brought their joined hands to his lips. "This is real." Outside, the storm began to quiet, rain softening to a gentle patter against the windows. Inside, two hearts that had been carrying so much weight finally felt light again, wrapped in the warmth of understanding and true love. The morning sunlight streamed through Hudson's apartment windows, casting a warm glow over the simple breakfast she had prepared. Graham sat across from her at her small kitchen table, his eyes soft with contentment as he watched her pour coffee into mismatched mugs. "I can't believe how different everything feels today," Hudson said, passing him a mug. "It's like a weight has been lifted." Graham reached across the table to take her hand. "That's because we're finally being honest with ourselves and each other." He glanced around her modest apartment, taking in the half-packed boxes from the night before. "Are you ready to come home?" Hudson's heart fluttered at the way he said, "home." "Yes," she replied with a gentle smile, though I think we might need a few trips to get everything. They spent the next hour carefully packing Hudson's belongings into boxes. Graham insisted on handling the heavier items himself, while Hudson wrapped her collection of framed family photos in old newspaper. They worked in comfortable silence, occasionally catching each other's eye and sharing warm smiles. As Graham carried the last box down to his car, Hudson took one final look around her apartment. This small space had been her sanctuary during the difficult weeks after leaving the Whitaker estate, but now it felt like closing a chapter rather than an ending. The drive back to the estate was filled with quiet conversation and shared plans. Hudson's hand rested in Graham's as he drove, their fingers intertwined comfortably. When they pulled up to the mansion's circular driveway, Mrs. Harland was already waiting on the front steps. The moment Hudson stepped out of the car, Mrs. Harland hurried forward with tears glistening in her eyes. "Oh, thank heavens!" she exclaimed, pulling Hudson into a tight embrace. "The house hasn't been right without you, dear." Graham watched the emotional reunion with moisture in his own eyes. "She's home to stay this time, Mrs. Harland," he said softly. Mrs. Harland pulled back to look at them both, dabbing at her eyes with her apron. "Well, it's about time you two figured things out. Now let me help you with those boxes." The entire mood of the house seemed to shift as they carried Hudson's belongings inside. The rooms felt warmer, more alive, as if the very walls were breathing a sigh of relief. Even the staff seemed more relaxed, offering genuine smiles as they passed in the hallways. After the boxes were brought in, Graham took Hudson's hand. "I thought we could walk through the house together," he suggested. "Maybe talk about some changes we'd like to make?" Hudson squeezed his hand in agreement. They started in the formal living room, where dozens of photos of Willow still lined the walls. "I've been thinking," Graham said, studying the photographs. "We don't need to take all of these down, but maybe we could create a special memorial wall instead, something that honors Willow while allowing the rest of the house to evolve." Hudson's heart swelled with love for his thoughtfulness. "That's perfect. We could use that wall in the library, the one where she used to love sitting and reading." They continued through the house, discussing possibilities. The dark, heavy drapes in the dining room could be replaced with lighter fabrics. The unused sitting room could become a cozy reading nook. Small changes that would help the mansion feel less like a museum and more like a home. When they reached Willow's old art studio, Hudson paused in the doorway. "What if we turned this into a therapy space for the foundation?" she suggested softly. "We could offer art therapy sessions here. It would be a beautiful way to honor Willow's creativity while helping others who struggle like she did." Graham's eyes filled with emotion as he pulled her close. "That's exactly the kind of change we need to make at the foundation, too," he said. "No more hiding mental health struggles behind closed doors. We can create programs that actually help people, that show them they're not alone." They spent the next few hours sketching out ideas for new foundation initiatives. Hudson's background in education perfectly complemented Graham's business expertise as they planned outreach programs and support groups. They would maintain all the good work the foundation already did while expanding its mental health services. As evening approached, Mrs. Harland insisted on preparing a special welcome home dinner. The dining room filled with the aroma of Hudson's favorite dishes as they all sat down together, not as employer and staff, but as family. After dinner, Graham walked Hudson to her room. The same room she'd occupied before, but everything felt different now. Instead of closing the door like she had during those first uncertain weeks, she left it open. The simple act felt symbolic somehow. No more barriers, no more distance. Hudson began unpacking her boxes while Graham leaned against the doorframe, watching her with a soft smile. "You know," he said, "someday soon I hope you'll be ready to move into the master suite with me. but I want you to feel completely comfortable here first." She turned to him with grateful eyes. "Thank you for understanding, for everything." He crossed the room to kiss her forehead gently. "Get some rest. Tomorrow we start our new chapter together." As Graham bid her good night and headed to his own room, Hudson sat on the edge of her bed and looked around. The room no longer felt like a guest space she was borrowing. For the first time since Willow's death, she felt truly at peace, not just with being in the house, but with everything that had led to this moment. She could feel Willow's presence, not as a ghost that haunted the halls, but as a beloved sister who had known exactly what both she and Graham would need. Love had found its way through grief, bringing healing neither of them had expected, but both desperately needed. The autumn morning dawned crisp and bright, sunlight streaming through the mansion's windows as Hudson helped Mrs. Harland arrange refreshments for the foundation board meeting. Her hands trembled slightly as she placed fresh-baked scones on a silver tray, knowing how important this day was for both the foundation's future and her relationship with Graham. The board members arrived promptly at 10 o'clock, filling the formal dining room with quiet conversation. Graham stood at the head of the table, his presence commanding yet gentle as he welcomed everyone. Hudson took her place beside him, her heart swelling with pride as he began to outline their vision. "The foundation has always been about helping others," Graham explained, his voice steady and sure. "But today we want to expand that mission in Willow's memory. We're launching new initiatives focused on mental health counseling, art therapy, and community healing programs." Hudson watched as the board members nodded approvingly, some wiping away tears as Graham described how these programs would help others struggling with the same challenges Willow had faced. The meeting concluded with unanimous support, each member expressing enthusiasm for this new chapter in the Foundation's history. After the last guest departed, Graham took Hudson's hand. "Come with me," he said softly, leading her through the French doors into the garden they'd restored together. The autumn flowers were in full bloom, creating a tapestry of golden yellows and deep purples. In the heart of the garden, surrounded by the beauty they'd brought back to life, Graham turned to face her. His eyes held a warmth that made Hudson's breath catch as he slowly knelt before her. "Hudson," he began, his voice thick with emotion, "I want a lifetime with you, not because Willow asked you to take care of me, but because you've shown me what real love looks like. Will you marry me? Not because of a contract, but because we choose each other?" Tears spilled down Hudson's cheeks as she nodded. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes." Graham stood and pulled her close, kissing her tenderly. Then, hand in hand, they walked through their sunlit garden, their steps light with the joy of beginning a new life together, one built not on grief, but on faith, compassion, and the healing power of second chances. Thank you for being here. If something in this story stayed with you, I'd love to see you again. Subscribe. And tomorrow I'll bring you another story crafted with heart.